that would be. Oh yeah, it says that my audio is not working. Okay, it should work now. Nice. All right. Perfect. I think it was not recording it. All right, so just mute yourself during the explanations, and then whenever I ask you some questions, feel free to unmute yourselves. Yes, just perfect. I just deactivated again the audio for everyone. I will start sharing the slides. Let me just go there. This is not, yeah, perfect. Are you able to see the slides? Someone is still not muted? Yes. All right. Great. I will mute you all again. Perfect. All right, guys. So if you see me looking up, it's just going to be me letting more people in during the webinar. But let's get started. So the topic of today and the name of the webinar actually was Become a Mind Reader BD. Why become a Mind Reader business developer? Because we all have to deal with people to a certain extent. We work with people when we do prospecting. We work with our managers. We work with partners and so on. And sometimes it's a little bit difficult to get the attention that we need, right? So it's a little bit difficult to convert them into calls, meetings, or to convince our manager to give us a promotion, or even just to convince them to, execute on some ideas that we have for the business. So we thought, well, it would be really great to have a deep dive into how we can overcome these challenges. And one very practical tool that we can use is called the DISC model, which is really all what we're going to do today, what we're going to talk about. So today we're going to see first, what is this DISC model? We're going to talk about the different personality styles, behavioral styles identified with the DISC model. And we're going to give very practical tips in terms of communication and written communication, in particular emails. So really, how can we write effective emails towards specific personality types? Now, why we're here, what are the goals of this webinar? The first and most important one is actually to increase our self-awareness and really making sure that we get to know ourselves a little bit better and that we react in different situations, different communications, different people. Of course, to improve our communication style, which also results in increasing productivity and performance, because if we're better able to connect with people, then people listen to us, and then hopefully we can actually achieve our goals, which for most of you, I presume being generating more revenue or generating more, of course, opportunities or leads for your business. Now, let's get directly into what is this model. And before I give you more details into that, I want to make a little disclaimer because we're going to talk about different behavioral styles, different, let's say, personality styles. And I know that people tend to rank these different styles. So the first and most important disclaimer is that this model does not, let's say, exclude certain personality types. Ideally, and in general, most people actually have all the 4 different styles that are explained by the DISC model. The other thing is that once we discover that we have like a specific like natural behavior, it doesn't mean that we are limited to that behavior. We can actually change, we can adapt, and we can get rid of stuff that don't serve us, and we can develop skills and behavior that actually serve us more depending on our goals. It is definitely not a label, so I encourage you to not start calling yourself like with the things that we're going to talk about later. It is not good or bad in the sense there is not like one behavioral style which is better than the other. All of them fit different needs, and of course everybody's different, so it's really not like one is better or than the other. And the last very important disclaimer, we are not judging on intelligence here. So it's not that one behavioral style is smarter than the other one or something like that. That's not the case. It's really an exercise to get to know each other and ourselves better. Now, before we start, I would like you to do a little exercise. So just if you have a piece of paper or something where you can write, I would like you to write down 3 words. And these 3 words is like 3 adjectives on how people, the close people to you, would describe you. So just like if I would ask your best friend about how is Velina, well, we should be able to say 3 words on how people describe her usually. Just write it down, take a few seconds to think about it. You can write them down and we will use them to reflect on it a little bit later. I'll give you the time to write as I just slowly go to the next slide, which is really going a little bit more in depth into the DISC model. Now, what is this DISC method or this model? The DISC is basically a behavioral self-assessment test, which helps us understand how people and ourselves interact and behave. And as mentioned before, we use it to improve our communication style. Now, the DISC method or this model actually has 4 different spheres, or like 4 different descriptions of how people usually behave in certain situations. For convenience, we also use some colors, which are red, yellow, green, and blue. As mentioned before, when I was saying like the disclaimer, like don't start calling yourself with these things. So don't start calling yourself, oh, I'm a red, I'm a yellow, I'm a blue, like, oh, it's fun. But, you know, it's not what defines us. Keep in mind that is social science, right? It's really based, of course, on psychology and so on. But as a social science, of course, it has its flaws and it's not accurate 100%. Once again, we're all a mix of all of them. So just take it, of course, really as an exercise of self-awareness. But don't get too much into it. I've done that, and that's not necessarily always great. So the first quadrant, the red one, we call it the dominant quadrant. The yellow one is the influential quadrant. The green one is the steady or steadiness quadrant. And then we have the blue one, which is the conscientious one. Now, I'm not going to go in depth now into what they are, because actually we're going to see each of the styles individually. And for each of the styles, we're going to see what characterizes that, how we can better recognize them, what are some words they use, and what's the best way to interact with them. So for now, just like start familiarizing with these colors and with these different characteristics for each one of the colors. Now, let's go and see really what are the elements that the DISC model takes into account. Now, the DISC, what takes into account is really few different elements of how people usually behave, and we see them represented here in this quadrant. Now, we see that on the top, so the red and the blue, and for convenience, now we're going to call them the red and the blue. On top of the quadrant, we see task-oriented, right? So why task-oriented? Because people that tend to be in this quadrant, they tend to be really focused on the tasks, on the processes. They tend to be very focused on the things, really, the goals that they want to achieve. Whereas at the bottom here, the blue and the yellow is actually people-oriented. So here we find people that are more like, let's say, people-oriented. So they tend to focus more on the well-being of people, on the feelings of other people, and so on. Then the other axis of this quadrant is actually how active and reserved people are. And we see that here on the left, we have people which are more reserved. So the blue and the green people tend to be more reserved in general. Whereas on the other side, we have people which tend to be a little bit more active. Or in other words, we could say that people that are on the right, so the yellow and red, they tend to be more extroverted, right? So people that enjoy and they take energy from other people, from being with other people. On the other side, on the left side, we have people which are more introverted, right? So people that really take more energy from, of course, being more on their own and spending time on their own. Now, this quadrant is going to be very helpful because this is going to give us a lot of insights, and we're going to learn. It's going to give us a lot of insights on how to recognize these people. So obviously, when we're doing, for example, cold outreach, or if we meet people at networking events and so on, We cannot know how these people are before we talk to them, right? We just have no clue. But this quadrant actually is going to give us some hints that are going to help us recognize these people from very, very visible things. What are these things and what is the process to recognize the different styles? We can call it OAR, which stands for observing, assessing, recognizing. Now, when it comes to observing, what do we want to observe about people? We want to observe a few things. So first is, what are people talking about? What do they talk about? Do they talk more about people, their friends, their family, and so on? Or do they talk more about their job or their sport and how good they were at this specific competition and so on? So really, what are they talking about? What interests them, right? The other thing is, how do they say these things? Do they have always the same tone of voice? They talk in a very, very, very short voice, very small voice, or they're very energetic. They change the pace, the tone of voice really fast, and so on. So how do they talk? How do they interact with people? Then the other thing is, what do they ask? What type of questions do they ask? Do they ask more about your holidays? Do they ask more about your family? Or do they ask you more about very specific processes that they need to do a specific job and so on? So the way of asking questions can also be revealing of the other person's behavioral style. And the last one is the body language. Are they more like laid back, or they tend to get very close? They tend to be very touchy, or they tend to be very like cold, you know, and they tend to keep you at a distance. These are all stuff, of course, that can help us quite a lot into identifying what are the different personality styles. Now, the second step of the process is assessing, right? So observing, assessing, and recognizing. In the assessing, what we're going to look at is really the two dimensions of the quadrant. So are they more reserved or are they more active? So are they more introverted or extroverted? And this, of course, we can notice that as we interact with people. And then the other thing we want to look at is, are they more people-oriented or more task-oriented, right? So, and this, again, if we look back at the questions they ask, the way they talk, how how is their body language, it's going to give us insights into these two different elements. Once we have that, of course, the next step is just to recognize these behavioral styles. We should reflect on the behaviors. Then we can place the person in the quadrant in our head, of course, if we're talking to them live, and then we can adapt our communication style to the person that we have in front of us. Now, as mentioned, the quadrant here is an extremely helpful tool to basically help us place these people. Now, let's see what usually people with the different colors, very generally, what do they talk about? Red people tend to be very focused on themselves. They tend to talk about them. They tend to talk about results. They talk about change, goals. They have very strong values that they live by, and you're never going to change their mind on that. Then people that are yellow, so on the influencer type of behavior, they tend to talk more about people, team spirit, good things. They're very optimistic. They talk about the future, and they also talk about themselves. They also tend to be quite self-centered. As you can see, these two type of people, they are on the right quadrant, meaning they're quite extroverted. You typically find people with the red and yellow personality, red personality specifically in positions of power, management, and so on. Yellow people, a bit in different kind of jobs, but definitely business development is a mix of the two. Salespeople tend to be a lot in the yellow side of the quadrant. Marketing people also, especially the ones that organize events and so on. Then we have the green people, the steady people. They tend to talk about principles, proofs. They talk about the team. They talk about agreements. They tend to be very, let's say, accommodating as types of people. And the last, the blue one, so the conscientious types of people, they're very, very, very fact-oriented. They talk about details, facts, processes, rules. They love all of this. So they can go on hours and hours just talking about processes, you know. I like to think of the blue people as the people that read all the instructions of the IKEA furnitures before starting to build them. I'm more the type of person, all right, I think I know where these things go. Let's just go for it and see what happens, right? And so the blue people, they're more like fact-oriented, detail-oriented. Now, let's dive more into the different styles, starting with the red one on top, so the dominant style. Now, what type of people are these dominant people? Dominant people, so the red people, again, for convenience, they're people that are highly motivated by power, authority, winning, competition, and success. There's not the case that these type of people, then they end up in position of power, they become athletes, they become CEOs, they become presidents, and so on. Because that's really what motivates them. They're really driven by this. They're very goal-oriented, so they really like to be in a position in which they can, of course, put this natural behavior at use. There are a few things that they really value a lot. So they value competency, they value concrete results, and personal freedom. You're not going to find someone with dominant style which really follows the rules extremely strictly and so on, and that likes to be put in a box. They also have fears, of course, and the main fear of red people is actually the one of losing control, being taken advantage of, and being vulnerable. That's also why very often people in a position of power, they don't seem to be very accessible, right? They're not very easy on being vulnerable. They don't do that naturally, right? Of course, once again, we can all change and we adapt in the different situations. But let's say naturally, if there would be no society judging us and we have one dominant style, we would completely be like that, right? So we would be very goal-oriented and so on. Now, why the fears are important when we talk about the different behavioral styles? Because as we approach, for example, let's say we're talking to a manager and we have a new idea, it's a brilliant idea, and this person tends to be on the dominant side of the quadrant, right? You might be in a situation in which this manager in particular is gonna, let's say, overshadow you or not enable you to do this or to put your idea in practice, because that might cause this person to lose control, right? And this is not going to happen. That's not something that they like to do. This really stresses them, and that's not a situation in which they want to be. And for your sake, that's not a situation in which you should put a red person if you want to do business with them, or if you want to, of course, if it's your manager and so on. We're going to see how to interact with them in a more effective way. Now, when they're under stress, they tend to really lack considerations for others. They don't care about what you feel, how you feel. All that matters is that they have certain goals, they need to reach those goals. And if they're stressed out for whatever reasons, they're gonna let you know, and they're not gonna be nice about that. That's why it's nice to have like, let's say, kind of list of positive and negatives, right? And for those of you here that have read, these are like some things to take into account. Now, in the positive, let's say this is more like how you see yourself, or like the positive values of being of this specific behavioral style. Usually, red people tend to be the initiators, right? So if there is something that needs to be done, they're gonna be the first ones, like, all right, let's do it. They organize everything, and you can be sure that whatever project has a red person at the lead, it's gonna be done, because that's so important to them that this thing gets done. They're very determined, they're very self-confident, goal-oriented, and they do get things done. That's as simple as that. Like, they cannot conceive not to get things done. It's just how they are. Now, the problem is that sometimes, even though they act like, it's not that they're mean and they act out of like being mean to you, not at all, it's really just their nature. But if they're talking to someone else, which is really on the complete opposite spectrum, they can be perceived as aggressive, as rude. They can interrupt people, which can be very annoying for the person that they're talking to. They come across as very authoritarian and very egocentric. They're always talking about them, about their processes, and so on. So if you're red, you can learn how to balance this and try to be a little bit more conscious that there are other people around you, so that you should also pay attention to them and not only to your own goals. Then, what are some practical tips? So if we're talking to red people, how can we do to have an effective communication with them? So first is really giving them the bottom line, meaning just go to the point. They don't care about all the details. They don't care about like how you feel about something. They really don't care. Like the motto would be really like be brief, be concise, be gone, right? So there should be something like that when we're talking to rep people. So it's really about like going to the point. What do you want from them? What's in it for them? Great. That's all what you should focus on. Then be brief, really. Be very short, but speak up. Red people don't really like when people are very remissive or like too laid back or maybe scared even. They really don't like that. It's not something that they appreciate. So if you're talking to a red person, just be confident, make your point briefly, and then make sure that you speak up and that you actually ask for what you want, right? I have a friend, for example, is a director of sales for a company, and he really doesn't like, he gets really annoyed with his team when they go to negotiate with him and they don't prepare the negotiation. Why? Because sometimes he's actually willing and ready, and he planned already to give them more money, but they don't ask for it. And they're just like very laid back, and he gets always so upset about this. Like, why don't they ask for the money? You know, like we have it, they should ask. So speak up. People like red people, your manager, if he's red, if they're red, they do like it. Then focus on your discussion narrowly, meaning like don't go too broad on the topic. Like you don't need to tell everything of how you did that thing and how you achieved it. They don't care. Just like focus on what's on the plate right now. Don't repeat yourself. That's also the other thing. Red people tend to be really quick with thinking, so you don't have to explain them everything. They're going to go to the conclusion on their own, most of the times correctly, and they don't like when you repeat yourself. This is almost like an insult to them, right? So like, I got this, like, that's fine. So don't repeat yourself. And last and very important one, focus on the solutions and not the problems. Red people don't like to talk about problems, because if there's anything that they're good at is to solve these problems. So if you go to your manager with an idea, go with a solution. Don't just say, hey, I have this problem. No, yeah, I have this problem. I tried this, and this solution. This doesn't work. Can you help me out? That's how you can get things done. That is exactly the same in a sales context, right? So if you're talking to a red person, don't go like too far into different things, and just go really to the point. So emails. How do we write an email? I will also show you a tool that is going to help you out with this to test your emails, and you can see a little hint here. Now, if you're sending an email to a red person, now I took a case, an example of our cold outreach bootcamp, which is going to be held next week. So if I want to send this email to a business developer, which tends to be on the red spectrum, what should I say? Well, I should write a very short email, and I shouldn't give too many details. So it should sound something like, hey, Mark, you should join the cold outreach bootcamp. It's a short course that helps business developers improve their cold outreach process and generate up to 30% more qualified opportunities. When can we have a call? Notice here that I put a number. Why? Because it is very specific, and red people do like that. All right, so do I need more leads? Do I want to generate more leads? Yes, no, and they're very fast at taking a decision then if you're short, if you give like exactly the information they need, nothing more, nothing less. Short email and so on. Now, let's go to the yellow, so the influential style. What type of people are they? So here we have people that are motivated by social recognition, group activities, and relationships. They really value a lot other people. They want to spend time with other people, and that's really what motivates them. They value coaching, counseling, freedom of expression, and individuality. That's why many people with the yellow personality styles tend to be more on creative sides of the things, right? They might be artists, they might be actors, they might be marketing people, as I said before, they might be content writers, or they might be business developers as well. Hopefully we do like people, so we should be also a little bit yellow. The biggest fear of yellow people is social rejection, disapproval, loss of influence, and being ignored. If you have colleagues which you recognize as yellow, or if you're talking to a prospect that you perceive to be like very explosive as a personality, those are the worst things you can do to them. If you ignore them, if you reject them, that's something that they really don't deal with. When they're under stress, what happens is that they tend to become very unorganized. Why? Because they're so enthusiastic, so excited about things that they tend to take on too many things. When they tend to take on too many things, then what happens is they also get a little bit unorganized, and then it's complete chaos. And that's not a good situation to be in. Now, what are the positive sides of being yellow? Well, they tend to be very sociable, talkative, very enthusiastic, energetic, persuasive. So they're really great at motivating people to do things, right? So people are like, oh, sure, let's do it, right? On the other side, the person that is receiving the information from a yellow person might perceive them as like not really nice to them because they're not listening to them. They just really focus on what they have to say, but they don't listen to what you have to say. So it's not nice to be on the other side, right? Once again, they can be highly competitive, which is good. I consider myself quite competitive, but it might be a problem in certain situations, for example, at work. They tend to be very impatient as well. That's really related to the fact that they want to do so many different things, so they get very impatient, they lose track of time, and they tend to be a little bit too exuberant. So sometimes for some people, especially if they're introverted, being with a yellow person really takes a toll on their day, right? Because they can be too much for some people. Now, what are some practical tips? Now, if you want to really conquer the heart of yellow people, make them do what you want, share your experiences, make it personal. So really talk about your experience, talk about like what you did, how you did it, the people you were with, and so on. Make sure that you allow them to ask questions and to talk specifically. So we said they really love to talk. So make sure that you do that. Try to put them a little bit back on track, especially if you're on a sales call and so on, but still give them time to ask questions. Focus on the positives. If you go to a yellow person with only problems and negativity and so on, you really drain their energy. They don't like that. I know that because I'm a little bit like that. So I don't like when people come up just with problems and they're so negative. That's not nice. I prefer to be optimistic and think about the opportunities. Don't overload the yellow person with details. That's something that we do not like, really not at all. They don't like to be interrupted as well. Again, because we tend to be a little bit more on the egocentrical side of things. And one thing that if you really want to conquer yellow person, is really to show respect for their spontaneity, which is the first thing, but also for their high energy and optimism. I remember from all the training I did in these past years, like the compliment that I like the most and that I remember the most is when people tell me, oh, wow, you have such a high energy. I really love that because it really just comes naturally to me. So when people notice that, then I remember that they noticed that, and I remember all the people that told me. So those people, I really like them. So let's go now on the emails, right? So how can we convince someone on the yellow side of things? We can say something in a more enthusiastic tone and really trying to make the other person feel really special, right? So, hey, how are you? We have a bootcamp coming up, and I imagine it would be a perfect one for you. And the imagine, why imagine? Because it's more expressive. It expresses, like, it's more related on the feelings. It's something like more visionary, right? So it actually works better in terms of communication. It's a short course on cold outreach that helps you connect better with prospects so you can create more qualified opportunities. Notice that here I didn't mention numbers, I didn't mention details. What I focused on is the fact that as a yellow person, you're going to be able to connect better with your prospects, right? So it's not about like how many leads you generate and so on, but really about the fact that you can build better relationships, because that's something that yellow people actually value more. So then if you know that, you want to throw that in emails. And I close with, it would be great to have you on board. Shall we have a quick call? Because if we have such a person on board, our life is going to be so much better, right? This is a way in which you can make a yellow person feel really special, and you might convince them to join you. Steady style. So the green people, what type of people are they? Let's check it out. So steady people, green people, they tend to be very motivated by cooperation, opportunities to help, and sincere appreciation. They tend to be very calm people, very nice people, and they really value working with others, right? So that's something, if you remember, the green is on the lower part of the quadrant, really people oriented. They love to help people. Many people with the green personality, they tend to work in customer service roles, for example, or in the service industry or in the healthcare industry, because they really love that. That's really something that makes them fulfilled. They tend to value loyalty, helping others, and safety, security. So let's say they're not the most like risk prone, they like stability, and that's okay, right? So they like their to be doing what they have to do. Then the biggest fear for green people is loss of stability. If you go to someone, so if you realize that you're in a call with someone that tends to be more on the green side, and you propose a solution which is too innovative for that person is going to freak out, is going to be like, no way, we have to change all our processes, all the things. What if I cannot, like, no, that's too much, right? I cannot change anything, so sorry. No, we stay, like, we keep things as they are, right? So I'm pretty sure you heard this objection, like, no, we're good as we are, we don't want to change, right? Maybe it was a green person on the other side. So they fear losing stability, losing change, losing harmony, like just, you know, like they don't necessarily like conflict. So they like when things are just quiet and calm, and they fear offending others. They really don't like that, because once again, for them, it's important that the other people are good, and they don't like to have conflict or something like that. Now, how do they behave under stress? This is a funny one. They become too generous. Again, it's a form of overcompensation. If they're too stressed, they just start giving away too much. And the funny thing is that, again, remember that we all have these different personalities, right? And you're also going to notice that at different times in your life, different circumstances, or even just now with two different people, maybe work and personal life, you tend to be quite different, or maybe not. But in my case, it was the case. So when I started working on the BD school, I developed a lot my yellow part, starting from a red, then went to yellow. And then at some point, I had a lot of the green side. And I really felt I was just like there doing, and just like trying to help everyone, to the point that I almost burned out, because you also need to kind of like check yourself at some point. So yeah, under stress, green people tend to become very generous. So that's weird, but it happens. All right, so let's see the positives and negatives. Positive, green people tend to be really good listeners. They like to listen to other people. They're very calm, patient, caring, and really trustworthy. So they're really stable people to have around. They're very nice people to have around. They're warm, so they're nice to be around. Now, the negative side is that they tend to be a little bit close to new ideas. So that is one thing. They don't really like that. They don't seek change. They like to stay in their comfort zone. They tend to be a little bit stubborn. I think this is really related to the fact that they don't like change. They don't express themselves. So they're very laid back. They're the type of people who are going to say, it's always like, yeah, sure. And of course, I understood everything, and so on. Until the point in which they can't take it anymore, then they explode, and then you're done. So if they get angry and they, and that's not good for them anymore, you lose them forever. And they tend to be a little bit passive. So if you're like working with someone, I don't know, colleague and so on, and you would like them to be a little bit more like taking initiative and so on, they're not naturally going to do that. Again, we all have the 4 different styles, so this is something we can change. But naturally, if there would be no society judging us, they would be quite passive in terms of personality. Now, practical tips. If you're talking to a green person, try to be very personal, amicable. So really try to build a personal relation with them. Express an interest in them. So ask them, how are they doing? What did they do yesterday? How was their family, their holiday? Anything you know about them. Do express this interest. How are you doing? That works really well with green people, because that's something they really value. So if you show them you value them, and they say, oh, well, this person is so nice to me. Also, be clear with your expectations. That is something, a mistake I made many times with green people, just thinking that, staff were like understood and so on. So maybe I didn't make clear my expectations, and that usually doesn't go well, because then you reach a point in which the misunderstanding is so big that you're really working on two completely different things. So that happened to me with with teams in the past, but it also happened with the prospects. So maybe we're working on a deal and so on, and then suddenly we're just way off on what they wanted and what we wanted. And like, all right, this doesn't work. Take time to explain, provide clarification, provide details, and I should add, ask if the other person understood everything correctly so that you make sure that you're on the same page. Don't be confrontational or aggressive. That is really the best way to lose green people. And be polite. That is something that they would generally appreciate. Email for the green person. Hey, Mark, how are you? We have a bootcamp approaching, and I imagine that would be a perfect one for you. It's all about cold outreach, and it helps you understand better your prospects so that you can make them feel more appreciated and get their attention. Once again, the focus on the people, because that is something they value. Would you like to have more information? I would be very happy to have you in the course. Have a lovely day. Now, on the other side, and the other ones, I always ask, would you like to have a call, right? I didn't do it for the green person for the reason that I didn't want the person to feel too much pressure, right? So I didn't want them to say, oh my God, now I have to change it. And then the process, like, no, very light. Would you like to know more about it? So that you have all the time to understand if that's the right thing for you, basically. Now, let's move on to the last style, which is the blue style, the conscientious style. We said before they tend to like details. Now, let's see what motivates them. They are very motivated by opportunities to learn, to gain knowledge. They also really love to show their expertise, and they really love quality work, right? This is why usually conscientious people tend to be in jobs in which you really need to be very precise in the things you do. We can think about surgeons, for example. We can think about software engineers. If you work in tech, you know that if there is just one little mistake in your code, everything is screwed, so that's not possible. So software engineers tend to be really, really good at and detail oriented, right? They value quality, accuracy, and also a challenge, given that they can work within processes and rules and this kind of stuff. One thing that they really don't like and that they really fear with all their soul is criticism. Why they don't like criticism? Because generally speaking, they put a lot of effort and time into making sure that everything they do is spotless, it's perfect. So if you criticize their work, it's like a huge offense, because they spend so much, and that's all they live for that, so it cannot be that is like bad. And of course, they really don't like to be wrong. That's not something that is acceptable, right? Now, under stress, what happens is they tend to become overcritical and they tend to complain a lot. Now, I had a friend who was like that. He was always complaining, complaining, complaining. And then because I was more red, I was like, all right, look, you should do this, you should do that. Like, let's do this. And I was trying to fix his problems all the time. And he never would do anything about it. And I would get really upset. It was like, why you don't want to fix your problems? Then I took a training on the DIS model, and I realized that it was just his way to let go of the steam, right? He wasn't looking for a solution. It was just his way to let go of the stress. Like this complaining was just like his coping mechanism, if you want. But of course, something to be aware of, because sometimes it can be a bit frustrating, right? If you don't know about this, and it's like, oh, come on, it's, yeah, why is that? And then it just turns out it's because this person is like that. Now, let's move on to the positive and negatives. Now, positive. Blue people tend to be very logical, very formal, detail-oriented, disciplined. They follow the rule, like, they're just like very, very good, disciplined people. On the other side, they don't really like to take risks. They don't express themselves too much, in the sense of like, all right, I'm gonna do it. They don't give their opinion too much. They're very fixated on details. That's something they really love, like just details, details, details. If you ask them like, hey, can you send me this asset that you created? Or like, I don't know, can you give me a summary of your call with your client? They're going to tell you the minutes of this call, right? Maybe something that you don't really care, especially if you're red, maybe you're yellow. They tend to keep the distance, and they tend to be quite formal in the relation with people as well. This, I see it all the time when we have students that work with in tech, and their target audience is software engineers, CTOs, so chief tech officers, or this kind of stuff. Usually they tend to be quite on the blue side of the spectrum, right? So they tend to be very logical and so on. So for someone which is on the opposite, which is completely yellow, it's very difficult to get through them. I have a very fresh example from yesterday. We were doing a training, and this student showed me some messages that she sent to a person. This guy was working in tech and so on, tended to be like, he gave some details in his answer, but it was quite short. And then she sent him like maybe 4 or 5 messages in a row, and she's like, yeah, you know, because it was the end of the month, please don't judge. I was like, I don't judge, it's fine. But this guy then stopped replying. Why? Because I think he felt just too much. I was like, whoa, 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 this is a little bit too much. So you have to be aware of that. If you're talking to someone on the blue spectrum, don't be over exuberant. They don't like that. The other thing is that they tend to keep the same tone of voice, which sometimes makes the conversation really plain. So it's a bit difficult to focus or to follow, you know, if you're a little bit more excited as a person, let's say. Now, practical tips. So if you're talking to blue people, you can focus on facts and details. They're going to love you forever and ever. So this, they really like it. They don't like pep talks or emotional language. So don't start like, oh, how were you? Or like, oh, I don't feel really well because I don't know something. Like, they don't like that. They genuinely don't care. So that's just like you're wasting your time and indisposing them. Be patient, be persistent, and very diplomatic. That's another good piece of advice, especially if you're in calls with them. If you deal with your tech team, for example, like if you work for a tech company and you have to, let's say, build new features because your clients require that, and you're talking to engineers, you have to be very patient because you really need to explain them like why that thing is important, give as many details as possible, and so on. The same if you're like, I don't know, talking to other type of like tech people within your company. Maybe you work in a manufacturing business and you're talking to actual, like, I don't know, engineers and so on. That might be the same, right? So they're not going to listen to you if you're too emotional. Instead, focus on the facts. Don't be put off by their detached style. It's just their way of being. So it's not that they're being cold to you. You can actually get through them if you give time to get to know each other. At the beginning, they tend to be a little bit more cold and take the distance. Now, an email example, as you can see, is the longest one here for the blue person. So here, I'm informing you about our new Cold.Reach bootcamp. I'm informing you, very formal, very short, very factual. Let's say it's not like I think you would know. I'm just giving you a piece of information. It's a practical course of 4 hours, focus on Cold.Reach, 20% theory, 80% practical exercises, with this goal of giving you the ability to understand your audience, blah, blah, blah. We work with this company. This is what they achieved. And I think it would be beneficial to have a call and discuss if it's the right fit for you. Would you be open to that? Right? I think here I could have even put like a suggestion for a specific date. And I think the blue person would have appreciated that. All right. Now that we know a little bit more of these personality styles, I'm pretty sure that in your head now is going like, oh, maybe I'm more this, I'm more that. Oh, but I'm also this and I'm also that. That's usually what happens. But to make a little test and see if we're really on track with the learnings of this of the webinar, let's do a little exercise. I prepared like just 4 people, some people that I think you all know. And what I want you to do is I'm going to show you this person. And then in the chat, I want you to write, what color do you think this person is? They're just 4. So let's get started. So first person, this one, Will Smith. I hope you all know him. He's an actor, very famous in the 90s, still very famous. Okay, Velina says yellow, red. Who else? Red, Nancy. Okay, what more? What color is Will Smith? Oh, Nancy, are you relatives? Maybe. Okay, Garrett says red. What more? Red, yellow, Marike, good. Red, yellow, nice, nice. Others, someone else? What color is Will Smith? All right, Joanna also says yellow. All right, I think it's split 50-50 yellow-red. Turns out he's actually more on the yellow side. He tends to be a yellow person, so very exuberant, very excited, fun also. That's something I mentioned, but yellow people tend to be fun. Let's go with the second person, another very famous historical person, Albert Einstein. So what do you think? Blue, red, blue. What more? Blue. Perfect, Julissa. I think here it's like 100% almost blue, and you would be extremely right. It's definitely very blue. I mean, we're talking about a huge personality in terms of physics. So if he's not blue, I don't know who is. Now, let's see one more person. I hope you do know her, Mother Teresa. Teresa, I don't know how would you pronounce it. Okay, Verena says green. Garrett says green, green, green. Here it's, I think, 100% green. And you would all be right. She's actually green. Indeed, she dedicated her life to helping other people in need. So once again, if she's not green, I wouldn't know who would be. And let's go now with the last one. How about Beyonce? What do you think? What color is she? Yes, red, red. I think it kind of like also by exclusion, right? I gave it away. She's totally red, indeed. She's super goal-oriented, determined, and so on, and really loves her work. She's always doing something. So indeed, definitely a red person, very determined and goal-oriented. Okay, I'm very happy. I think we're on track with the learning. So we can go to the next and final 3 slides, which actually introduces with some tools, some tips that you can use for self-development, some tools that you can use to identify the personality of people before you talk to them online, and a couple of book suggestions to help you take the knowledge forward. So first, let's go with the tips. So if you are one of these scholars, what should you do to become a little bit nicer towards other people listening to you? If you're red, talk less, just be aware that you tend to talk a lot, be more patient with other people, allow time to chit chat. So sometimes for red people it's not important, but for other person it is important. Focus more on the emotions, try to avoid dominating interactions, and avoid to be rude. So if you're on the red side, take a screenshot, put it on your like a desktop somewhere, wherever you can see it all the time, and try to be more mindful about that and just practice that in your next interactions. Yellow people, we tend to go like round and round about things. So let's try to be a little bit more direct when we're talking, trying to stay on point so we don't confuse the people around us or like give them too many ideas and so on. We should also talk a little bit less, listen more to the other person, following up. That's a huge problem for yellow people. I had that for so long. I really had to focus on it, like following up. It's because it's a bit boring, right? It's process, like not very nice, but follow up is so important, especially in BD. So try to follow up with the important people. Try to be less emotional and try to really keep your emotions in check. Think more about details and avoid getting too close to people. So that's another tendency we have. Green people, on the other hand, you should talk more. We want to hear more of your opinion. So you should be more outspoken. You should focus a little less on the details. Again, you should control the emotions. Avoid being too firm on beliefs or like too stuck and too stubborn. You have to be more expressive and more goal-oriented in your communication so that people can follow what you want to say. And the same goes for blue. Also, blue should talk a little bit more. They could be a little bit more expressive. So I'm not saying you should be like me. I'm Italian, so that's why I use a lot my hands. So I'm not saying all blue people should do that, but just be more expressive, smile more, just try to be a bit more accessible to other people. Talk more about people, not only processes. Instead, talk less about the details. Try to talk to inspire. I think blue people have like a huge advantage because they have like, they know the inside out of their products, right? So they could talk about that for hours, but sometimes they fail and make it the other person understand the value of that because they get lost in the details. So instead, they should really focus more on inspiring people with the knowledge they have about their products or services, and then avoid to look too cold. That's the other thing we can do to improve ourselves. Now, the books, I have two suggestions. So the first one is called Emotions of Normal People by Marston. Marston is actually the one that created the foundational works of the DISC model. So really is the one that started talking about all the different behavioral styles and so on. And the other one is a little bit more recent. It's called Surrounded by Idiots. It's a really nice book, super easy to read with a lot of practical examples and so on. So that can really help you just like, once again, just like be more self-aware and be more aware of how other people behave. And it's a super, super easy read. And now the last one, I really left it for last because I think it's a game changer and it is so cool. It's a tool that is called Crystal. Crystal knows actually. It's an extension that you can put on your browser, on your Chrome browser. And then what it does is, well, it has different functionality. The one I like the most is that if you use it on LinkedIn, on a LinkedIn profile, it's going to give you insights into this personality style. Now, of course, it uses like all the things that you put online, basically. And that's how it makes your personality assessment, basically. Here, I did it on me. I mentioned before, I tend to be more on the yellow side. So if you want to talk to me, you should keep the energy light with jokes or upbeat attitude, send visual aids like graphics, charts, and images. I do really like that. Do not focus on details. I really don't like that. I get really lost and bored and I don't like that. And don't give like too many analysis or data. That's not something I like. Now, if you would click here on the little inbox here, the little mail icon, it actually gives you ideas on the type of email you should write to me. And it also gives you like prompts. For example, do you want to have a sales call with Lucia? Do you want to have a partnership call? Or do you want to, I don't know, just network with Lucia? And it's going to give you different types of templates that you can use. On top of that, the emails I showed you before were actually redacted using Crystal because they have another function, which is basically the email checker, where you can paste your templates and then it's going to tell you and it's going to give you insights based on the personality style that you are trying to reach, basically. It's a super nice tool, so check it out. You have 10 free credits. Then if you want, you can get the premium one, or you can just sign up with another email and just get a new account. Now, before we go into the Q&As, of course, I would like to invite you all to the Cold Outreach Bootcamp that we have starting next week on Tuesday. It's a bootcamp, so it is focused on how to use these insights to personalize emails, create cold outreach sequences, and so on. And as you learn from the emails we send out to all these different colors, it's a very practical course. So you're actually going to write these templates, you're going to write your sequences with the idea, of course, of helping you to generate more leads. So if you want, you find more information on thebdschool.com/cold outreach bootcamp, and there you find all the details about the bootcamp. Now, let's move on to the Q&A, and I'm extremely happy that I stayed on time. So my yellow side today wasn't so strong, luckily. Are there some questions that you have maybe on the chat, or feel free to unmute yourselves as well? And in the meantime, I'm checking the chat as I saw some comments.
Hi, Lucia, it's Velina. Hi.
Yes, hi, Velina.
I am a fellow yellow here. My
Yay.
question to you is, how do you replenish your energy after talking to some green or blue people?
That's a very good question. It's actually, I did work with a lot of green and blue, and I did not realize on the moment. And sometimes it was really tiring. I remember one time we were working with the designer, and they would just go on and on and on for 20 minutes, you know, about these details and so on. So usually what I do after, I really need time for myself. So I just like put if I'm in the office, for example, working with them, I just put the music on and I zone out, and I tell the team like, hey, for the next half an hour, I'm not there. And then what I do, I usually like to listen to some music that is a bit comforting. So like, I usually have different types of music that I listen on different moments. So I just put on the music and then I try to do some deep work. Because what happens to me when I talk to, for example, blue people and so on, is that I feel I'm wasting time. And if I feel I'm so sorry, I feel I'm wasting time. But if I'm wasting time. It means that I'm taking time from all the stuff I have to do. So then to compensate, I like to do some deep work on things that I actually have to do. So that's usually what I do. I just like zone out for like half an hour or so, and I just focus on some deep work.
Thank
Cool.
you.
No worries. Other questions? Questions or insights or ideas or anything else you want to share?
Yeah, I also have another question to you, and sorry, maybe I'm going to ask a lot of questions. But how do you network with blue people? What are your tips for that?
Yeah, so it is like a bit of a challenge, but of course, like yeah, I mean, sometimes if that's your audience, you know, you have to like kind of integrate with them. So what I do, I try to, before I go to networking events and so on, so depending on the audience I'm reaching, like for example, if I'm going to a networking event when I know there are going to be mainly tech people, like tech people, not only engineers, but like people on the technical side of the company, right? So there might be engineers or like very specialists like technicians or this kind of stuff. What I try to do is try to read as much as possible about that specific product that they have, so that I can interact more on a product level, because they're really interested in that. So if I would talk like too much about like the business implications, let's say, or if I would be too like how to say, too enthusiastic about stuff, I know that I would drain their energy and then they wouldn't like the conversation with me. So I try to focus more on the technical side of things, which is like not always like fun, because sometimes like I had to deal with people that work like with very, very technical things, like I don't know, I remember once she was working on screws, like they were producing screws for planes, right? So just something, it's like, I know nothing about that, but I had to learn all these things. I was reading all about the providers and all the different companies and so on. And that kind of enabled me to connect with this person more on the product side. And then after, once we broke the ice, then we could talk about some other stuff, but still very much like product oriented. So I try to build my knowledge on that specific topic that I know they're interested in, and then I try to focus on that. All right, other questions? We have like 1 more minute, so if there is no other question, then I will leave it at that. Oh yes, perfect, Garrett. So Crystal knows, how accurate do you think it is? It highly depends. It is quite accurate as long as the person is active. So if you go on LinkedIn, if you go on my profile, for example, I'm always on LinkedIn. I'm very active. So Crystal knows has a lot of information about me, so that they can draw very accurate profile. What happens is often, especially let's say people which have like very high position in a company, this happened to me like with VP of something, VP sales or this kind of stuff, or like CTOs or these kind of things. They're really not much active on I mean, they're maybe on LinkedIn, but they're not posting or this kind of stuff. It's not necessarily very accurate. However, what you can do, and that's a tip I recommend to everyone, if you don't find information on LinkedIn about that specific person, just Google the name of the person. Because if they have a position of responsibility, which I'm assuming most of the case is, because if you're doing prospecting, you're talking to a decision maker, you're probably going to find some information. Maybe you find an interview on YouTube, you find the podcast that they did, you find an article, an interview they released years before for at a conference. You know, you never know. So if you don't find something on social media, just type the name of the person on Google and then see what you can find. And then now that you know all these insights on how people are, maybe you can really get, of course, like you can read in between the line, right? Nice. So other questions? So, Mohammed, for like any courses in depth, so this webinar was actually based on an official DISC model training. That was a training that I did. It was about 4 hours. So I really tried to condense the information. So if you want to go more in depth into that, like my advice was actually be to go on Crystal Knows. On Crystal Knows, they have a blog with really so many insights. So I think you can just like start there, because pretty much you're going to get a lot of insights already there for free. And then if you really want to get more specialized, or, you know, maybe you want to like offer the training to your team or these kind of things, there are a lot of companies that offer training specific on the disk. One is called insights.com. Some of the slides, like the graphic, for example, that I showed you before, is from Extended Disk, which is the official disk company. So you can check that one. Personally, I would go with the free information because it's you find really a lot online, and it's really a matter of exercising. It's not really a matter of like getting more knowledge. It's more a matter of like using it, and this takes a bit of time. Other questions? So I see, Kesha, so the recording is available fully for the people that are members of the BD School. So if you took a course with us in the past, or if you are part of the platform, then you get the webinar is available immediately after in full. However, on our YouTube channel, sometimes we post extracts of webinars. So you might find like a shorter version of it on YouTube in a few weeks. Some other questions or comments before we go? All right. Okay, guys, I hope you enjoyed the session and it was insightful, but most importantly, I hope you're going to use it in your next outreach, LinkedIn post, or anything else you do. If you want, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn if you're not connected yet. Also there, I try to post like everyday tips on BD, so happy to help you out. Thank you so much, and I'll see you on our channels in the coming days. Have a great day.